So just imagine spending um, 30 years of your life helping run this massive, incredibly strict religious broadcast.
Right, one that reaches like 58 countries.
Yeah, exactly. 58 countries, enforcing all these rigid rules about, what you can watch, how you should act, and basically preaching this terrifying fear of hell.
A huge operation.
Massive. And then one day, you just walk away. You move to Florida, play golf, and decide that absolutely none of it was true.
It's wild. But today's deep dive is actually about a guy who did exactly that.
We are tracing a seriously unbelievable trajectory today. We're looking at how a traditional Jewish kid from Ohio became, well, a 1960s drug-addicted hippie.
Which is a leap on its own.
Right, and then he transforms into this Pentecostal powerhouse and ultimately abandons that entire empire to embrace mysticism and this belief that the whole world is already saved.
It is such a profound and honestly a really messy, layered evolution. And our source for this is episode 38 of a YouTube series called Let's Discover God Together.
Hosted by Steve Reed, right?
Exactly. Steve Reed. His guest, Dan Newman, lays out this multi-decade personal journey with, honestly, a startling level of transparency.
He really does. And just to be clear, right up front for you listening, Dan gets into some highly debated theology here.
Very heavily debated.
Yeah, and he makes some pretty pointed political critiques along the way, too, calling out things like white nationalism. So we're not here to debate or endorse his politics or his specific religious doctrines.
We are totally impartial guides here.
Exactly. We're exploring the source because the psychology of his evolution, like the mechanics of how a human being completely rewrites their worldview 3 different times, is just absolutely fascinating.
The human element really is the core of this whole thing, because to understand the radical grace he lands on at the end of his life, you really have to look at the absolute chaos of his beginning.
Okay, let's unpack the search for meaning, because Dan grew up in a very traditional Jewish household in Ohio.
Superstructured.
Right. He went to Hebrew school starting in the 3rd grade, chanted the songs, had his bar mitzvah at 13, was confirmed. Like, he had a highly structured, expected path laid out for him.
But then he hits adolescence. It's the late 1960s, and he enters Ohio State University.
Yeah, 1969.
1969, exactly. The absolute peak of the counterculture movement, and he completely derails.
And what's wild is where he's living.
Yeah. The stark contrast is crazy. He's actually living in the exact same Jewish fraternity house his father had lived in years prior.
Wow.
But instead of carrying on that family legacy, he just rejects all of those inherited boundaries. I mean, he gets totally consumed by psychedelics,
Yeah.
MDA, THC, psilocybin, LSD,
Basically everything.
everything. And he fails out by his 2nd year.
And his parents were wealthy entrepreneurs, right? So you can really see their desperation playing out here. They try to fix this spiritual void with financial resources.
That's what they know how to do.
Right. So they send him to these high-end, super expensive rehabs in New York City, New England, Pittsburgh, and he fails out of literally all of them.
Every single one.
He just keeps bouncing from these pristine professional interventions right back into the drug houses. Why are these top-tier interventions completely failing to stick?
Well, he was trying to solve a crisis of meaning with a clinical intervention. Like, rehab can detox the body, sure, but for Dan, the drugs were just a symptom of this massive internal void.
He had no anchor.
Exactly. He had no internal anchor, and his turning point doesn't even happen in one of those clinics. It happens outside a drug party.
Of all places.
Right. He's high, deeply paranoid, and he steps out into the night just to get away from the noise. He looks up at the stars and just cries out.
But it wasn't like a religious prayer, was it?
No, not at all. It was simply, Lord, whoever you are, if you are, I need help.
I struggle with this next part a bit, honestly. Because
Yeah.
he's basically throwing spiritual spaghetti at the wall.
That's a good way to put it.
He's throwing random pleas to the universe to see what sticks. And according to the source, what sticks is a George Harrison song.
My sweet Lord.
Yeah. He hears the former Beatles song, My Sweet Lord. Now, historically, that song was written about the Hare Krishna faith.
Right.
So how does a Jewish kid, high on drugs, hearing a pop song about Hare Krishna, experience a genuine spiritual pivot toward a completely different God? I mean, it sounds like he was just intoxicated and latching on to whatever happened to be playing on the radio.
What's fascinating here is how human beings process, meaning when they hit absolute rock bottom. At that moment, Dan's intellectual defenses were just completely exhausted.
So he couldn't overthink it.
Exactly. If someone had handed him a theological tract or preached a sermon at him right then, his brain would have just rejected it. But music bypasses those defenses.
It hits the nervous system directly.
Right. And Dan interpreted the lyrics, I really want to know you, Lord. as God, as he put it, coloring outside the lines.
Wow, coloring outside the lines.
Yeah. It didn't matter what religion George Harrison actually intended with the song. For a desperate person, it was a frequency he could finally tune into. It was the crack in his armor.
And that vulnerability leads to this massive, immediate pivot. Because in 1971, he gets invited to a Pentecostal holiness church in Ohio.
And he has this wild experience.
Yeah, he experiences this instant supernatural deliverance. The source says he is baptized in the Holy Spirit, and all the heavy drugs, the cigarettes, they are just instantly gone.
Never touches them again.
Never. Which forces this profound psychological reset.
Oh, absolutely. Because he moves from the absolute chaos of the drug scene, where a complete lack of internal boundaries was, literally killing him, into the most rigid, structured external environment imaginable.
Think about that shift for a second. The strict Pentecostal church, for Dan, was basically like a full-body cast for a broken person.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Like when your bones are shattered, a full-body cast absolutely saves your life. It holds you perfectly still so you can actually heal.
And he did heal. He goes back to school, gets an undergrad, a master's, and eventually a PhD.
And he ends up spending 30 years in this movement.
30 years.
Yeah.
With 22 of those years on staff heading up their counseling program.
And this wasn't some tiny church.
No, it was a massive operation. The source points out this really interesting paradox. This church was located in a collapsed steel belt city in northeastern Ohio and Pennsylvania.
Right, where the economy had just tanked.
Yeah, devastated since the 70s. Factories shutting down everywhere. Yet, in the middle of all this local decay, this church thrived to the point of broadcasting a television program globally.
To 58 nations.
58 nations.
But doesn't that environment sound like he's just swapping one extreme for another? I mean, Dan describes this church as hyper-legalistic.
Oh, very much so.
They had extra-biblical laws against dancing, against going to the movies. It was heavily controlling. They explicitly taught that if you disobeyed the pastor, you literally lost your salvation and were going straight to hell.
That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. So for a guy coming out of extreme addiction, is this intense, fear-based legalism actually a protective measure, or is it just another form of bondage?
Well, when you are surviving extreme trauma or addiction, your brain honestly craves binary rules.
Black and white.
Exactly.
Okay.
Do this, don't do that, and you will be safe.
Yeah.
That rigidity provides this artificial floor when you feel like you're falling. So in the beginning, that structure really served him.
It saved him.
It did. But as Dan healed over those 30 years, as he got his degrees and began studying more broadly, his internal capacity grew. The external container, though, did not.
It stayed rigid.
Right. And he experienced what he called a divine discontent. He could just no longer reconcile the grace he felt internally with all the fear and control being weaponized from the pulpit.
The cast basically started to suffocate him.
Yeah, the bones had healed, but he couldn't move.
So to actually live and breathe, he had to cut the cast off. So in 2001, he makes this massive leap of faith after 3 decades. He leaves the church and moves to Indianapolis.
And that physical move initiates a total rewiring of his spiritual operating system. He shifts from viewing God as this distant, demanding figure to viewing God as immediately accessible.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the timeline jumps a bit. Around 2014, he's living down in Florida.
Basically retired.
Yeah, he's retired, playing golf every day, and he discovers this guy named Mike Parsons on YouTube. And Parsons is teaching mysticism.
Which is a loaded word.
Totally loaded. In his old church, a word like mysticism would probably get you kicked out immediately.
Oh, without a doubt.
But Dan points out that the word actually comes from the Greek root mysterion, meaning mystery, which is used, I think, 27 times in the New Testament.
And that semantic shift is so crucial for him because in his previous environment, mystery was dangerous, right? It couldn't be controlled.
You needed concrete rules to keep the fear at bay.
Exactly. But now he's engaging with the idea that the divine is inherently mysterious, yet entirely accessible. He gets heavily influenced here by Francois du Toit's Mirror Bible.
Oh, right, the Mirror Bible.
Yes, specifically focusing on this concept that believers are seated in heavenly places right now, not like waiting for the afterlife, but actively in the present moment.
And that concept just completely destroys how he used to pray.
Oh, it shatters.
Because the old method he taught for decades was this exhausting 3-step model.
Yeah.
You literally had to fight your way through these atmospheric spheres. First, the natural heaven, then you had to do battle in this demonic second heaven.
Filled with principalities and powers.
Right, just to try and push your prayers through to God up in the third heaven. Over 30 years, the physical and psychological toll of waking up every day believing you have to wage literal war in the atmosphere just to be heard, I mean, it must have been crushing.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's the ultimate transactional relationship. It's this framework where access to the divine must be earned, fought for, or achieved through relentless spiritual warfare and, perfect behavior.
It's like an employee who is just terrified of a cruel boss.
Yeah, that's it.
You are doing backflips, working 80-hour weeks, constantly looking over your shoulder, just hoping you don't get fired.
And Dan's realization was that he wasn't the terrified employee. He was the heir who already owned the company.
Wow. He already had the admin password.
Exactly. So he adopted this practice he called multi-location. He believed his spirit was already in perfect union with God. He described it as praying 2 under 47 from Papa's lap on the throne of grace, even while he was just out cutting the grass or, playing golf.
Just imagine what it feels like to finally drop that armor after 30 years of fighting.
It is a fundamental paradigm shift to an identity-based theology. Union with God isn't something he has to achieve anymore. It's just this constant underlying reality he just has to acknowledge.
He doesn't have to earn it.
Right. He cites the Apostle Paul's instruction to pray without ceasing, arguing that it doesn't mean being on your knees all day pleading for intervention. It means living from a continuous subconscious awareness of that union.
But once you pull that single thread, the idea that God is immediately accessible and totally intimate, the entire sweater of his previous theology just unravels completely.
It has to.
Which brings us to the final massive shift in Dan's evolution, what the source calls the inclusion conclusion.
Right, because if God isn't making you fight through a demonic second heaven to be heard, you are forced to completely rewrite how you view God's ultimate judgment and really his plan for the rest of humanity.
So around 2018, Dan fully embraces inclusion, or universal reconciliation. He adopts this belief that the whole world was already saved before the foundation of the world.
Everyone.
Everyone. And that God is not holding anyone's sins against them. He completely rejects the idea of eternal conscious torment in hell.
Which is a huge departure from his Pentecostal days.
Huge. And to make his point, he uses the biblical parable of the lost sheep from Luke 15. His logic is just so simple. A good shepherd doesn't find the one wandering sheep and then torture it for wandering away.
Right.
The shepherd searches until he finds it and he brings it home.
He systematically dismantles the fear-based theology of his past. He even takes direct aim at dispensational theology, which had been like a massive cornerstone of his old belief system.
Okay, wait, let's pause here because the source throws out some really heavy terminology in this part.
Yeah, it does.
He mentions dispensational theology, the rapture, the end times tribulation, and something about rebuilding a temple with red heifers.
Ah, the red heifers.
Yeah, give me the 5-year-old breakdown here. What do cows have to do with the end of the world, and why is Dan rejecting all of it?
Okay, so dispensationalism is a modern theological framework popularized in the 19th and 20th centuries. It's basically the belief that history is divided into specific eras or dispensations, and it heavily focuses on a literal future apocalypse.
Like the Left Behind movies.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
The rapture, the idea that believers will suddenly vanish to heaven while the earth suffers this horrific tribulation, is central to this.
And the cows.
Right, the red heifers refer to a specific Old Testament purity ritual. Many dispensationalists believe that for Jesus to return, a third Jewish temple must be rebuilt in Jerusalem.
Okay.
And to purify that new temple, they need the ashes of a perfectly red heifer without any blemish. I mean, there are literally organizations today trying to breed these specific cows just to trigger the end times.
That sounds incredibly stressful. You're basically constantly scanning the news for breeding reports in the Middle East to know if the world is about to end.
Exactly. And Dan just dismisses all this modern obsession. He argues that the apocalyptic language Jesus used in the book of Matthew, chapter 24, wasn't actually predicting events thousands of years in the future.
So when did it happen?
He believes those prophecies were actually fulfilled in AD 70, when the Roman general Titus destroyed Jerusalem and the Second Temple.
Oh, wow. So if you believe the apocalypse already happened in AD 70, you instantly remove all the modern anxiety of the rapture.
You don't have to worry about red heifers.
Or tribulation timelines. Yeah, it is a massive theological exhale for a guy who spent 30 years holding his breath.
It really is. He's stripping away all the doom, the gloom, and the exclusivity. He points to the biblical story of Peter and Cornelius to show just how expansive God is.
Remind me about Cornelius.
Cornelius was a Gentile, completely outside the Jewish religious rules. Yet the story says he knew angels and was hearing from God before he ever even knew about Jesus.
Oh, okay.
So for Dan, this is proof that the divine constantly colors outside our rigid religious lines.
So what does this all mean? I mean, I hear all of this grace and inclusion, but it creates a massive logical problem.
How so?
Well, if everyone is already included, if God isn't keeping a scorecard of sins, if there's no threat of hell hanging over us, and if the apocalypse is literally already over, what is the point of religion?
That's the million-dollar question.
Like, what was the point of Dan's intense, lifelong, grueling journey in the first place? If we all end up in the exact same spot, why not just stay high in the frat house?
This raises an important question about human motivation and the nature of the divine itself. Dan answers this by pointing to the Greek word ginosko.
Ginosko.
Yes, ginosko means an intimate experiential knowing. It's the difference between, say, reading a biography about someone and actually being married to them.
Okay, I track with that.
According to Dan, the journey of life isn't about achieving salvation or earning a spot in heaven to avoid hell. The journey is about awakening to a reality that already exists.
So it's an awakening, not a transaction.
Precisely. He states that the heart of the Father is humble. His profound realization was that the divine is knocking on the door of the human heart, not from the outside trying to break in, but from the inside, asking you to realize what is already there.
Wow.
The point of the journey isn't to get God to love you. The point is to finally experience the love that was there the whole time.
Knocking from the inside. I mean, that is a wild place to land when you look at the massive arc of Dan Newman's life.
It really is.
He starts as this traditional Jewish kid in Ohio. He spirals into a desperate, drug-addicted hippie pleading with the stars. He finds absolute safety in the strictest religious rules imaginable, builds an entire career and identity inside that box, only to realize the box is suffocating him.
And then he tears it all down.
Yeah. He strips away the rules, the striving, the atmospheric spiritual warfare, the fear of hell, and just finds a humble God waiting on the inside.
It is an incredibly powerful narrative of deconstruction and reconstruction. And it really invites you as the listener to turn that lens inward.
Absolutely.
Think about the structures in your own life right now. What boxes or rigid routines are you clinging to? Because we all build them.
You do.
We build them out of a need for safety, a fear of chaos, or just a desire for control, just like Dan did when he was terrified of slipping back into addiction. But are those structures still serving you? Has your internal capacity outgrown the container you built years ago? Maybe it's time to step outside of it and see what else is possible.
It definitely makes you reevaluate the messy, broken parts of our lives. Which leaves me with a final thought for you to chew on today. Dan's story suggests that the most profound spiritual transformations rarely happen when we are perfectly following the rules.
Right.
They seem to happen only when we completely exhaust our ability to follow them. Could it be that our greatest, messiest failures, the moments when our compass is spinning completely out of control, are actually the strict prerequisites for our deepest understanding of grace? It's almost as if you have to get completely lost in the woods before you realize you never actually needed the map in the first place. Something for you to mull over today.